Minnesota State Historic Preservation Review Board for the National Register of Historic Places. For the record, today is May 19th, 2026, and my name is Catherine Solomonsson. I'm the of the Review Board. Our purpose this evening is to consider nominations for the National Register of Historic Places. As most of you know, the National Register of Historic Places is a federal list of places deemed worthy of preservation. The criteria for inclusion have been established by federal regulation. A detailed nomination form has been completed for each of the properties to be considered tonight. Board members have reviewed these in advance. They're only charged to determine whether the nominated properties meet the National Register criteria. Owners of the nominated properties and other interested parties have been invited to send written comments and attend this meeting. Tonight's meeting is a virtual meeting for everyone present, and we are conducting it in a way that's consistent with the state of Minnesota's open meeting requirements. It's open to the public. An announcement and related information are posted on the State Review Board webpage, and it's now being recorded. After introductions and announcements, National Register nominations will be presented by staff members from the State Historic Preservation Office, conveniently known by its initials as SHPO. People attending the meeting will have the opportunity to make comments. Then the Review Board will discuss and vote on the nominations. During the meeting, we want to make sure that everyone can hear everything, so please remember to have your microphones muted when you are not talking, and we'd appreciate it if you could have both microphones and cameras on if you are speaking. Before we go any further, I'd like to introduce SHPO staff members who manage every aspect of the nomination process, from inception through submitting nominations to the National Register of Historic Places office in Washington, D.C. for final review. Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer Amy Spahn was unable to attend this evening, but I'd like to introduce others. National Register Architectural Historian Ginny Way, National Register Archaeologist David Mather, National Register Administrative Specialist Lillian Egner, and Communication and Grants Management John Disher, who's working his WebEx magic to make sure this meeting runs smoothly, and that's much appreciated. National Register Archaeologist David Mather will give us some SHPO updates.
Thank you, Chair Solomonsson. I'm David Mather. I'm the National Register Archaeologist. Because Amy Spahn, our Deputy SHPO, is away this evening, I'm filling in for her to do the program announcements. I want to start by welcoming the board and the public to this meeting and informing everyone that the meeting is in compliance with the state of Minnesota's open meeting requirements as a virtual meeting under Minnesota Statute 13D. Chair Solomonsson already mentioned about microphones and whatnot, so I'm going to skip that part and get down to the bottom here. Our best announcement for this evening is that Rosaura Ramos Santos has joined the State Historic Preservation Review Board for her first meeting in the role of architectural historian. Welcome, Rosaura. We're so glad that you're here. In other good news, Nicole Foss has a new role at SHPO as our Survey and Inventory Program Coordinator and Data Manager, and we are in very good hands with Nicole in this position, and grateful to her every day for her work. For our upcoming State Review Board meetings, it looks like we're going to have a light agenda in August, and so we would like to shift our in-person meeting to November instead. As we did last May, a year ago now, this will be a hybrid meeting, recognizing that not everyone can attend in person. As we did last night, we plan on having an outing for the board in the afternoon before the meeting, and we'll be in touch about that as plans progress. Last thing, since the last meeting, the following actions on nominated properties have been conducted by the National Park Service. We have listings for the Holy Trinity School this was originally presented at the May 2024 meeting. It is now listed because a new owner of the property withdrew the previous objection. Other recent listings are Emmanuel Lutheran Church, Barrett Lakeside Pavilion, Lincoln Park, and the Fox Auto Complex. And then 3 removals: the New Ulm Commercial Historic District boundary change, the Murdoch House, and the Piper House. Did I have the New Ulm Commercial District in the wrong part? That wasn't a removal, was it?
It was more like additional documentation and boundary reduction, but that's kind of a
Okay,
mouthful.
reduction. So yeah, okay, we're balancing it out. And then and that's what we got. Thank you so much. Back to you, Chair Solomonson.
Thank you, David. Does anyone else have any announcements? Okay, we can then move on to board member introductions. And I'd like to invite the board members to introduce themselves and identify the positions they fill on the board. And this evening, we're delighted to welcome our new member, Rosaura Ramos Santos. And since she hasn't met most of us yet, board members and Rosaura as well should feel free to say a bit more than usual about their relevant backgrounds. We'll do this by roll call, starting with board member Gladhill.
Hi, and welcome, Board Member Ramos Santos. I am Bethany Gladhill. I am the secretary and member at large. This is my 2nd term on the board, I believe. In any case, a few years and great group of people to be with.
Thank you. Board member James.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Rosara. My name is Elliot James. I'm Associate Professor of History at University of Minnesota Morris, and I'm one of the historians on the board.
Thank you. Board member Levasseur.
Hi, I'm Andrea Levasseur. I am retired from the Chippewa National Forest, where I was the forest archaeologist and historic building manager. And I worked real closely with the Leech Lake Reservation and later on the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. And we contracted a lot of our surveys through them because they had their own crew, of course, and they're co-located within the forest boundary of the Chippewa National Forest. So I managed about 3,000 historic and prehistoric archaeological sites and about 35 historic buildings and building sites. And I retired in 2011, so it's been a little while since I worked there. But I've been on this board since I think 2014. So.
Thank you. Board member Radford.
Hi, I'm Casey Radford. I am an architect with McDonald Mack Architects, and I serve one of the historic architect positions on the board. I think I've been on for a couple years now, and I just had my tonsils out yesterday, so I'm not going to be talking very much. So, anyways, welcome to the board.
Thank you. I'm glad you could make it. Board member Ramos Santos.
We lost her for a second, but I believe she might be back.
Looks like she's rejoining.
Okay. All right. Board member Ramos Santos.
Good afternoon or evening. I'm Rosaura Ramos Santos. I can either go by board member Ramos or Ramos Santos. I'm an architectural historian. I don't know if we were doing any additional information. I kind of got thrown off the call for a bit.
Oh no, yeah. Board member Ramos Santos, if you would tell us just a little bit about your background.
Of course. So I started in architecture school, then switched to historic preservation. Background started at the University of Minnesota and eventually ended up at the University of Florida for master's. And I have most of my experience comes from the federal Section 106.
Thank you. Board Member Rulon Miller.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay Rulon Miller, and I serve as the vice chair to this board, which I started, I think, 2019. I had to look back. So I am a member at large. I currently work at the Minnesota Historical Society in public art and art at the Capitol, and basically anything to do with government relations. Prior to this role, I have experience in historic sites and museums and libraries. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Schulke.
I am the retired executive director of the Otter Tail County Historical Society, headquartered in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. So I was in that position for a number of years, newly retired, and I don't even know how long I've been on the board. So my kind of specialty is public history and general history. I leave the architecture to the experts.
Thank you. Board Member Stark.
Hi, I'm Board Member John Stark. I'm a historic architect on the board, and I've been on the board for a number of years. I've joined this club of recently retired people, so I've been retired 2 years. It seems to be the thing here. It must mean you have a successful career and you're able to retire, so that's a positive thing. I spend a lot of my time now. I did a lot of projects around the Twin Cities area in Minnesota, few in other areas. But most of the time is now with grandchildren and grand puppies and old cars.
Thank you. Board Member Terrell.
I'm Michelle Terrell. I'm an archaeologist and historian, a cultural resource management consultant, and co-owner of Two Pines Resource Group. I serve as the historical archaeologist on the board. And welcome, Board Member Ramos.
Thank you. Board Member White.
Sorry. My name is Frank White. I am a historian. I'm a member at large, and I'm in my third term and final term. Being on a part of this organization or group. So.
Thank you. Board Member Worcester.
Hi, Mike Worcester. I'm the Executive Director of the Morrison County Historical Society in Little Falls. Proud to say I was a colleague of Chris's for a long time, and I still call him a colleague even though he's retired now, so it's okay. My job is dealing with the public history and local history and my single claim to fame is that I'm probably one of the few people that can talk extensively about county and local option in Minnesota. And if you need to know what that is, I'll tell you later.
Thank you very much. And again, I'm Kate Solomonson. I'm an architectural historian, another retired person. I'm a retired professor of architectural history in the University of Minnesota's School of Architecture. And my field is the history of American buildings and cultural landscapes. I've been serving on this board on and off since either the late 90s or early 2000s. And I've been very glad to be back. Okay, so did I skip anybody? Has everybody here had the chance to introduce themselves? Okay, so before we proceed to the nominations, we have one item of board business to take care of. The approval of the minutes from the board meeting on February 10th. Board members, are there any corrections to make?
Board Member Stark? Yeah.
Add just one on page 6, I guess it's about the Fox Auto Building. My comments in there were really a little bit needed in clarification that each automotive brand and showroom should be located. And it just kind of said cars are located, which didn't quite make sense to me. I'll send that to you, Jenny.
That's just fine. Thank you, John.
Any other corrections? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the corrected minutes?
This is Lindsay Rulon Miller, a motion to approve.
A second?
I will second. Board member.
Thank you very- All right. So we'll now vote by roll call, beginning with Board Member Gladhill,
Aye.
James,
Aye.
Lavasser,
Vote aye.
Radford,
Aye.
Ramos Santos, I will skip since you weren't on the board yet. All right, Rulon Miller,
Aye.
Schulke, Schulke.
Aye. Sorry, I was muted. Aye.
Okay, great, thanks. Stark,
Aye.
Terrell,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Worcester,
Aye.
and Solomonson. I vote aye. So the minutes have been approved. Thank you, everyone. Now we can move on to what you've all been waiting for, the presentation of the nominations. If any board members need to recuse themselves from a particular agenda, this is the time to let us know. Okay. Our first nomination this evening is the Alice Nettle Tower in Virginia, St. Louis County. The authors are Rachel Peterson and Phyllis Brower. Ginny Way, National Register Architectural Historian, will present the nomination. So Ginny, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chair Solomonson. I just wanted to clarify for the record that Board Member Lavasser and Board Member James were not at last meeting. So while I appreciate their eyes on the minutes, they technically have abstained. Thank you. All right. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if there is anything amiss. So, as Chair Solomon said, this is the Alice Nettle Tower in Virginia, St. Louis County. Rachel Peterson and Phyllis Brower of Hess Royce and Company are the authors. This property is being nominated in conjunction with the Historic Tax Credit Program. The Alice Nettle Tower is located at 550 North 3rd Avenue in Virginia, Minnesota. Constructed between 1976 and 1977, the 14-story modern-style apartment building overlooks Bailey Lake to the west. The main entrance to the building is oriented northeast. On left, we see a map of the area. The property is indicated by the yellow box at the center. At right is a map of the nominated boundary, indicated by the gold line. The first story of the building is recessed approximately 1 foot. Regularly spaced concrete pilotis divide the floor's facade into 24 structural bays and create the distinctive rounded shape. The building was designed in the round based on the preferences of senior citizens who, at the time, preferred shorter hallways to eliminate long walks and to create community. On the left is the exterior of the tower, camera looking west. At right is the building during construction in 1976. All floors of the building are organized around a central circulation core. The first floor contains the building's office, common spaces, and lobby. A breezeway was constructed as part of the building to provide a convenient sheltered walkway to the adjacent Columbia apartments, which were constructed a decade earlier. At left is the first floor plan. At right is the first floor breezeway, camera looking north. Floors 2 through 14 follow the same general plan. Corridors surround the central circulation core, and each floor has 12 wedge-shaped apartment units. Most apartments are 1 bedroom. However, the second floor has 2 two-bedroom accessible units. On the left is the exterior of the building, camera looking southeast. At right is a sample floor plan for floors 2 through 14. Post-industrial changes on Minnesota's Iron Range set in motion a chain of events that would lead to a sudden and dramatic housing shortage throughout the region by the 1970s. Heightened production on the Iron Range during World War II had depleted the region's natural ore reserves, and while post-war demand for iron remained high, the dwindling ore supply caused a slowing economy and fears of industrial collapse in the region. At left is the first floor community room, camera looking west. At right is the first floor lobby, camera looking southeast. Industrial production turned to taconite and plants began operation in the late 1950s. Financial success and beneficial tax laws inspired mines across the Iron Range to quickly shift to taconite production. Workers flowed in, creating acute housing shortages across the region. In the 1950s and 1960s, the range's largest city, Virginia, had an elderly population of roughly 13%. Because the cost of housing was increasing after the taconite boom, but retirement incomes were not, elderly residents were left with few choices. At left is the second floor elevator lobby, camera looking northwest. At right is the sixth floor hallway, camera looking east. The construction of new housing for low-income residents was largely driven by federal policy and programs before 1970, and the majority of affordable or subsidized housing units were built as public housing through federal housing programs. However, the number of units constructed on the range was insufficient to address the region's housing needs. The Minnesota State Legislature formed the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, also known as the MHFA, in 1971. The agency was supposed to, quote, assure decent, safe, sanitary housing for its citizens, end quote. When it began, the MHFA played a secondary role in the state's housing development, providing subsidiary programs to help Minnesotans afford and maintain housing, even as the market tightened. At left is the 8th floor hallway and elevator lobby, camera looking southeast. At right is the 6th floor kitchen, camera looking north. On January 1st, 1973, the Nixon administration froze nearly all subsidies for federal housing construction. In Minnesota, the federal freeze canceled or suspended affordable housing projects across the state. In response, the MHFA expanded its project funding to fill the need left by the federal government. At left is the second floor living room, camera looking west. At right is a second floor bedroom, camera looking east. Madsen Development was approved for an MHFA funding in 1975 under the agency's permanent financing program. The project proposed to construct a new affordable senior housing high-rise tower in Virginia. The project would add 150 new housing units, exceeding Virginia's projected need by 55%. The project was the fifth most expensive project approved in 1975 and was the largest outside of the Twin Cities metro area. Alice Nettle Tower was fully leased before the building opened. The building received over 400 applications for its 155 units, highlighting the need for affordable senior housing at the time. At left is a photograph of the building during construction in 1977. At right is a view of the 14th floor living room, camera looking southeast. The period of significance for this property is 1977. The level of significance is local. The National Register criterion is A, and the area of significance is politics and government. The property also meets criteria consideration G. The period of significance is 1977, the year construction was completed and the tower opened. When compared to similar properties throughout the Iron Range, Alice Nettle Tower is the best representative of the impact of the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. As such, the property meets criterion consideration G, properties that have achieved significance within the last 50 years. Alice Nettle Tower is the largest and most prominent example of senior high-rise tower funded by the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency in Minnesota's Iron Range. The property represents the deep need in Virginia for affordable senior housing and the MFHA's ability to jumpstart impactful, high-density housing projects through its permanent financing program. For these reasons, the Alice Nettle Tower is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. There is no correspondence related to this nomination.
Thank you, Jenny.
You're welcome.
time for public comments. If you wish to speak, please use the chat function or raise your hand, and Ginny will be have an eye out for you.
I do not see any hands, Chair Solomonson.
Okay, thanks very much. All right. If there are no public comments, we'll turn now to the board's evaluation of the nomination. Board members, may I have a motion regarding this nomination? And motion language is in chat if you'd like a reference for it.
This is Board Member Gladhill. I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination for the tower for listing in the National Register of Historic Places.
Thank you.
Board Member White, I would second.
Thank you very much. It is moved and seconded. Is there any discussion related to this nomination?
I see Board Member Stark, Board Member James, and Board Member Worcester in that order.
All right, Board Member Stark, why don't you start?
Few questions here. One, and this is just kind of in the order I wrote down as I read through them. It's
Sure.
To see buildings that I could have worked on. I was in college during this, so seeing newer buildings is interesting. And having worked on this building type, it's nice to see affordable housing type of buildings meeting here for this. They mentioned through carpet and floor finishes and things changing, but they also briefly mentioned kitchens being replaced, a few of them not specifically where, but there was in the integrity section on page 8, they mentioned the carpet, but they don't mention the kitchen. And if the kitchen was laid out, the new stuff in the same level, or, you know, where everything, cabinets the same and appliances in the same location, or if that got modified, would be just a clarification if it's possible. Okay. The other thing they mentioned, Alice Nettle and her history of this, and I looked her up. She died in 1985. I was wondering if she was available for any of the design of this, or if she was at a grand opening or had anything else to do with it besides just her name. On this, these are just minor little things. The second floor plan has a reference. The other floor plans show the toilets and bathrooms and the relationship of where the plumbing fixtures are. It showed some of them, and none of them show the stairs, and that's kind of a interesting thing. It's just a shaft. But if that's possible to get it into the print, I don't know what's available, but if it could be, it would help clarify it.
You're asking to clarify the location of the stairs in the plan?
It says stairs, but it's just a big shaft. You just see a big white room, and is it a landing? Is there, you know, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But second floor plan doesn't have the stuff the other floor plans has for plumbing, fixtures, toilets, where the bathtubs are.
Okay. I will speak to the authors to see what's available for us in that regard.
The other question, and maybe Rachel or Phyllis, you might be able to answer this. Why was there a full bath in the hallway? Is that it? You had to use the bathroom really quick? They ran out there? I've never...
Yeah, the unit bathrooms only have showers. So if you want to take like a soaker bath in the tub, that facility is available for you in those common bathrooms on the even numbered floors. But if you're just a shower only kind of gal, then you can use your unit bathroom.
Okay, that might be worth mentioning in there someplace. That it's an interesting way to do it. Probably was cheaper too.
It is. Yeah. Yep.
And then your photos are listed in the back, and it's a floor plan, and it might say photo 14 on it, and it's just one floor plan. And then another floor of the same floor plan says photo 13. Could they be combined together to make it a little easier to see them?
Is that okay with National Register standards, Ginny, if they're on different floors?
The National Park Service would prefer to have the individual floors individual photographs are represented on the floor that they are taken.
Like floor plan, or maybe it's the tag underneath it is wrong, but it's,
okay.
just picking one, six
Yep.
floors, and there's 6 floors, and each one has an individual picture, and they're out of order with the other floors. So maybe tag underneath that's
Okay,
decent.
we'll take a look at that. That sounds like something strange.
All I have.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's it.
Okay. Oh, that's all you had. I would like to just real quick, Chair Solomonson, I'm wondering if Rachel, you're able to address John's question about Alice Nettle and her presence during construction or design, if that came up in
Yeah.
research.
So she worked with the Virginia HRA, and so she was during her career involved with managing all of the Section 8 vouchers. And residents who lived at Alice Nettle Tower also used the Section 8 program for their rental assistance. And so she was involved in that capacity. Being a true Minnesotan lady, she was a little confused and embarrassed why this building was being named after her and was kind of shy about it. But I mean, had a wonderfully long and impactful career in social service, and so deserved the honor. But it was largely an honorific to recognize her work. She didn't work specifically at this building. She was a program-wide staff person.
Okay, thank you. Board Member James, would you like to comment?
Hi, this is a really interesting nomination. I'm excited to support it. I had a student, senior, do his project on the development of Hoyt Lakes and through the Earring Mining Company. And I saw that, MHFA decided that, Virginia could have it, but these other places couldn't have it based on their demographics. And my question really comes on kind of Section 8, page 20, where MHFA's goal was to ensure decent, safe, sanitary housing for all Minnesotans. And I'm just curious what we know about the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency's commitment to housing equity.
That is a good question. One that we can dig into more. I know that definitely on the range, their housing programs benefited white tenants a lot more than any other demographic that is reflective of that part of the state, especially at that time. But I don't know off the top of my head if the MHFA as a program had any specific equity goals, especially in the 70s.
Thank you. I was just curious because of the time period, of course.
For sure.
I think that it would be well worth a little research, Rachel, if that's available to us.
Yeah. I think, well, we have all the annual reports from that era, so I'll for sure double check those and do some more poking.
Okay, you and I can touch base later. To Board Member James's point, I think that it might be a very interesting thing to note.
All right, thank you. Board Member Worcester.
Thank you. I have to tell you, when I first saw the photos of this, I had to do a very small double take because it had a very striking visual similarity to the round dormitory at Moorhead State. And when I was reading through the application, it talked about some of the architects that worked on round senior housing. I'm just curious if there's any connection to any other round buildings that I've seen. And like I said, and full disclosure, I lived in that dorm when I was a freshman a few years ago. And so I was just curious because, like I said, I looked at that and it was just like an absolute mirror image of Nelson Hall in Moorhead.
Yeah, I know for sure there's one in Austin, one in Wisconsin, and then one in somewhere in Illinois that this specific firm did on this, essentially the same model. I don't remember, we were pretty focused on senior housing, but Phyllis, I don't know, you did some digging into circular towers, if you remember any connections to Moorhead.
No, I don't remember anything about that.
Okay. I know the dormitory at MSU was built in the mid-60s, so it would have predated this one by a full decade, easily.
Are there any other comments from the board?
I do have a comment. I think going back to Member James' question and then Jenny's comment about further research, it would be important to note that during the time period and given the area, the lack of documentation doesn't necessarily mean that there would have been equity. If that makes sense. Yes?
It does make sense, yes. I'm wondering if, given the age and the fact that this was a state program, if they would have tried to address some of the discrimination of the previous decade, right? As state agencies are wont to do, they want to prove they're making strides in whatever way that means. So I'd be interested to see whether or not they were articulating any sort of equity, understanding that the articulation of equity and the creation of equity are two very different things. If I don't know, professional explained that, did that cover what you needed, Board Member White?
I think that, again, you may not find any documentation because at the time, and maybe the individuals maybe didn't see it as inequity. And so it wouldn't have even been documented. And you may not find that out. I just pointed as one of those things that, again, the lack of documentation wouldn't necessarily, again, say that there was equity.
All right. Any other comments? Okay, so Ginny, we've got a number of suggestions here. And so are you interested in pursuing them?
Yes, I would consider these suggestions to be editorial and perhaps contextual over substantial. If we have concerns with the area, period, boundary of significance, then we would need to reestablish. I'm sorry, geez, Jenny. We might need to put the nomination on hold, but I would consider these editorial, and I'm happy to go forward if the board is inclined to do so.
Okay. The motion before the board is to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. Shall we go ahead and vote by roll call? Board Member Gladhill.
Aye.
James.
Aye.
Lavasser.
I vote aye.
Radford.
Aye.
Ramos Santos.
Ramos Santos voted no. I'm not sure if we're able to hear her.
Okay. Rulon Miller.
Aye.
Shilke.
Aye.
Dark.
Aye.
Terrell.
Aye. Thank you.
White. Okay. White.
Aye.
Worcester.
Aye.
Nope.
And Solomonson, I vote aye. Thank you, everyone. Motion passed, and we're on to nomination number 2, which is Site 21 SL 1107 Tower, St. Louis County. The author is David Mather, PhD, National Register Archaeologist, and he will present the nomination. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Solomonson. I believe I have shared my screen. Hooray. Yes, this is an exceptional archaeological site in northern St. Louis County, a place that has been on my mind for many, many years since it was discovered in 2010. I think There we go. Yeah, so site 21 SL 1107 is located in Lake Vermilion Sedan Underground Mine State Park. Because archaeological site locations are protected data under state law, I am not showing the exact location of the site within the park, and I am using the site's inventory number rather than its name during this presentation. The state park is located near Tower in northern St. Louis County and is near the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness and Superior National Forest. All of this big area is Lake Vermilion. If you have not been there, it's wonderful fishing and wonderful exploring. Here is the state park. Here is part of the Bois Forte Ojibwe community here, a little bit to the west along the south shore of the lake. So there's a couple different views of the site area. It's relatively level ground. It is thickly wooded in relatively young coniferous and deciduous trees. On the left is a view to the east, I believe, in from 2024. The view on the right is in 2010, when one of the first shovel tests was being excavated, shovel test 9, that found a lot of obsidian flakes and got the archaeologists very excited because that was a very unusual find. So also in 2010, there was a formal evaluation of the site. This was before the state park opened to the public. There were pretty extensive planning studies. You're probably aware Lake Vermilion is our most recent state park. It was adjacent and has since combined with Sedan Underground Mine State Park, and of course Sedan Underground Mine is a National Historic Landmark related to the mining industry, and a really, really interesting place. So during the formal evaluation, they came back to the area where the obsidian had been found in one of the shovel tests, and then dug a 1 by 2 meter excavation unit, 1 square meter at a time, but conjoined in one block. And that's State Parks archaeologist Dave Radford on the left in the early stages of that investigation. That's also him on the right in 2024. He's now retired. The unit, of course, was backfilled after the fieldwork in 2010. Dave on the right is checking to make sure that the nails at the corners of the 1 by 2 meter unit are still in place, and indeed they are, but otherwise you would not know it was there today. So in the excavation unit, they did find a lot more obsidian, and which was expected. They also found burned earth, indicating a hearth feature. And in that burned earth, there was a lot of very highly fragmented, intensely burned bone. And in addition, I looked at that material in 2011. Dave Radford wanted to use some of it for a radiocarbon date. It was the best available material for that. In addition to National Register work, I'm a zooarchaeologist, which is a specialist in studying animal bone from archaeological sites, and I was very interested in this site just because of the obsidian, and I was happy to take a look. And so all of this material on the right is unidentifiable animal bone that was intensely burned. It's, I guess unidentified other than to the point of knowing that it was from a mammal of some sort. And that radiocarbon date came back at 570 plus or minus 30 years before present. So we'll just say about 555 to 600 years ago, well within the late woodland tradition. It's an important chronological marker for us regarding this site and this component, because unlike most woodland sites that we deal with, there's no, at least from the small excavations so far, there's no pottery known from the site, which is a kind of a defining principle of a lot of the woodland tradition. Here are some of the archaeologists recovering these tiny, tiny flakes. One of the things that was really interesting about this is that after the initial discovery of in the shovel test of the obsidian flakes, they were, a lot of them were very, very small. And so when they dug the 1 by 2 meter unit, Bradford had all the screens changed out to smaller mesh because he wanted to recover as much of it as possible. And they actually re-excavated shovel test 9 and screened the soil again with the finer mesh to make sure that they recovered as much of the obsidian as possible. And it was remarkable, with 155 flakes, I believe, most of them these tiny, tiny things. And by far the most obsidian that's ever been recovered at a Minnesota site. It was very cold when they were doing this, and you can see the little piece there in the tweezers. That's Doug George, and that's Jim Cummings. You've seen Dave Radford. Leroy Guncher was the other archaeologist that was the main part of this team, and I consider all of those guys to be mentors of mine, and it was wonderful to see them do this project at the time, and it's wonderful to kind of revisit it now. A lot of the artifacts they recovered were stone or lithic debitage, which means the flaking debris from making stone tools. And so some of the materials they recovered, Hudson Bay lowland chert is a locally available material in northern Minnesota in the glacial till, siltstone, jasper taconite, gunflint silica, and quartz are also all locally available. One of their discoveries at another site that's not too far away was the quarry for Lake Vermilion Formation chert, and that was a previously unknown lithic source that they discovered also in those state park planning studies. That site is also eligible for the National Register. Knife River flint is a high quality material that was traded from Western North Dakota. And there's the obsidian. Another exotic material, which was really, really interesting, is Spanish diggings. And so this piece here was from the site, and this is an example from the comparative collection. And so that is from Wyoming. This beautiful point is from the archaic component, which is slightly below in the soil profile, but underneath the hearth and everything. That's a Red River chert, and that's a Radatz point from the middle and maybe into the late archaic tradition. Now, an interesting thing about obsidian is that through specialist analysis, we can not, well, I say we, but I can't do it. A specialist can figure out where the source of that stone was. And so this obsidian that was found on Lake Vermilion came from Obsidian Cliff in Yellowstone National Park, which is about 1,000 miles away. And that is of the most frequently encountered sources of obsidian in North America. That one is the closest to Minnesota. So this stuff, it was widely traded, and it's a really, really interesting thing just in terms of the economic implications of that alone. Here's a view from the National Park Service website of Obsidian Cliff in Yellowstone National Park. It is a National Historic Landmark. I've become kind of obsessed with this place. I want to go visit there. There's archaeology on the cliff and around it of Native people using that place to acquire stone, starting in the Paleo-Indian tradition early on and continuing all throughout the human history of that place. It seems like a truly remarkable thing. And so one little story in that big process is some bit of it coming to Lake Vermilion. Now, the other part about that I think that is significant about the site, the obsidian was easily or readily recognized right away in the excavation as an unusual and significant thing. The other part of it is this connection with the bear feast, and I think the obsidian is also part of that, because they all seem to be associated: the hearth, the bear bone, and the obsidian. When I was looking at the material in 2011, regarding the radiocarbon and whatnot, the only piece that was fully identifiable was this little tiny fragment here. And this bigger piece is is from a comparative collection. That's the second phalanx from a black bear, so a bone from the paw. If you look at your own fingers, basically the second segment between your knuckles is the second phalanx. And so I was, like I said before, really, really interested in this site already, and I didn't even dream that that was possible because this is a subject I was also very interested in. So, but as I'll explain, the presence of that calcined or cremated bear paw has some big implications, even though it's a very ephemeral little piece. So the context for examining this or understanding this is the anthropological context of bear ceremonialism, and this is something that has been considered since the late 19th century. It was most famously written up in a huge kind of almost global overview focused on the northern world, but that was published 100 years ago by A. Irving Hollowell. He described bear ceremonialism as a cultural, psychological attitude towards bears. Some describe it as respect, others as reverence, veneration, or worship. But one and all are in agreement that among the animals, bears are held in special esteem. And so it's a pattern of special treatment of bears that it relates to the treatment of other animals and plants and other aspects of the natural world, but is kind of enhanced in regard to bears. So Hollowell was looking at records from around the northern world, starting in Scandinavia, all the way across Siberia, Japan, Korea, and then all the way across North America. And what he found was that the patterns of the way these things happened, these rituals and treatment of bears occurred, was remarkably similar, even though the people involved were very diverse and different peoples, different language groups, different continents, everything. And so the elements of this include like a euphemism name for the bear, sometimes like grandmother or grandfather, or something descriptive like black food or honey paws or something like that. Rituals, that were conducted before the hunt. The bear is spiritually powerful, and so sometimes there are age and gender taboos about who does what around the bear. The idea of reciprocity, that the bear is giving itself, and that the hunter and the others in their group then are kind of in a social contract to treat, hold up their end of this arrangement. Apologies to the bear, offerings like funeral presents, things like that, keeping the physical remains, the bones, in good shape, not letting dogs chew on them, things like that. And then most importantly for archaeology, a funeral and a special repository for the bones. An example of this in the picture is the bear skull tied to that tree, and it's painted. This is from an example from an ethnography of the Cree from 1911. The Cree, of course, live a little bit farther north into Canada now, but historically, were in this part of northern Minnesota as well. We don't know for sure, what the connection is with this site, but these traditions are known in the close area. An example more recently from the early 20th century is from Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, Maud Kaig, and her story of the bear's funeral. The whole story is in the nomination, but I love her book, Portage Lake. She tells many stories of her childhood in there, and in my work at Mille Lacs and elsewhere, I found them incredibly useful. But she was a little girl when this happened. Her grandmother had took her to this place, and they went in, and she, from her young experience, she recognized it as a funeral. There were a lot of people there. There were, the people had brought food. There were presents. There was a man who was directing people where to sit and everything. And so she knew it was a funeral. But then when she looked to see who the person was, it wasn't a person. It was a bear. And so it was the special treatment of a bear that had been recently killed in a hunt. Archaeological connections with bear ceremonialism, kind of began in earnest in the mid 20th century. A couple of finds in New York by William Ritchie, of these kind of spectacular burial pits with lots of bear remains. Not too long later in Sweden, there was a really interesting study of bear graves that were created by the Sami or Lappish people. And the example on the right shows a brown bear, which is the same species as grizzlies here, but the bear had been killed and eaten in the feast, and then basically it was all the bones were put together, back together, roughly in the anatomical position, and then the skull placed here at the head, or where the head would be. So in Minnesota, I did an overview of representation of bear ceremonialism here previous to the nomination. And the key elements of that are, one, that Dakota and Ojibwe people in Minnesota, the bear is sacred to both of them. That is certainly a given. There's also representation of black bears, mainly black bears, but also grizzly bears in these archaeological sites in Minnesota. Not at this one. This is a black bear. Some of the sites have concentrations of skulls or other bones, hundreds in some cases. Some of the sites have prepared skulls with cut marks or ochre. And the main one for this site that includes this site is cremated bear paw bones, calcined fragments of the phalanges, like in this case, or other bones of the paw. There's also rock art and effigy mounts and portable art on this map on the right. Most of the spots indicated on that map are from zooarchaeology, which is the animal bone, and most of them are little places like this where there's a single bone or a few bones from a paw that are intensely burned, or maybe a single tooth. The pattern of bear ceremonialism seems to be that despite its economic and spiritual importance, they're generally invisible in the archaeological record, except in these exceptional circumstances, because they were intentionally put elsewhere, not with the other food waste and things like that. So other examples, just for a little context about the calcined or cremated paws. Here's the one from our site. This one is from a site in Voyageurs National Park. Again, the big bones here, the phalanx and the claw, are from a comparative specimen. The little ones here are from the site, and those are from a bear cub. There were also bones from an adult bear, so this was likely a mother bear and cub in the den in the winter. All of these little fragmented calcined bones are from Kittson County and far northwestern Minnesota. Both of these sites are associated with middle woodland or laurel components. The one down here is from the Crace site at Mille Lacs, which is in a contributing element of Catheo National Historic Landmark. And that's also a bear phalanx, 2 pieces of it, calcined or cremated. And that site, the main part of it, is an earth oven where there were scorched and burned teeth and bone fragments from cooking at least 32 bear heads. And so this must have been an enormous feast with at least 32 bears, but near the earth oven where the heads were cooked, there's this intensely burned paw. And I think that is a good connection between the bigger feast preparation and all of these little places where you just find the ephemeral part. And so in any case, with this site, the period of significance is from approximately 3000 BCE to about 400 CE. That covers the archaic and late woodland components. The statewide, it's at the statewide level of significance under National Register criteria A and D in the areas of archaeology and Native American heritage. And it is clearly a place that is worthy of preservation and eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. It's also a really great example, I think, of the significance or the importance of small sites. This is a point that the National Park Service staff made in the archaeology bulletin in terms of not overlooking small sites. This is a very small site that produced an incredible amount of information. It is well preserved and will be protected going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Was there any correspondence?
Oh, thank you. There was no correspondence related to this nomination.
Okay. And so now we have time then for public comments. And if you wish to speak, indicate so in the chat or raise your hand. Amy, is there any sign of interest?
I do not see anything from the public. No, no hands.
If there is no one who would like to speak, we'll turn now to the board's evaluation of the nomination. Board members, may I have a motion regarding this nomination?
I see that board member Schulke has his hand raised.
Okay.
I'm going to make a comment later. I'll make the motion, but I don't know the specific language.
I'd be happy to make the motion.
Okay. Go ahead.
This is Board Member Terrell. I would like to make a motion to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination of Site 21 SL 1107 for listing in the National Register of Historic Places.
Okay. Is there a second?
I would second Board Member White.
Thank you very much. So this is moved and seconded. Is there any discussion related to the nomination?
I do have, yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted. So David, wow, thanks for the lesson. I mean, it was, I was back in school again. It was really great. But is there any plan to do any further work at the site, or are you, is it the policy to kind of leave it as is?
Yeah, the policy for this site since the investigation has been just to leave it alone and preserve it. The park has taken great care to not, I mean, they've interpreted the subject matter from the site to the public in I mean, really positive ways, but the site location itself is not pointed out at the park, and it is not marked or anything like that. The Bois Forte Tribal Historic Preservation Office was deeply involved in consultation about all of the sites in the park, and they were and are particularly interested in this one. And I think I would suspect they would not want further investigation there. While there are a plethora of really interesting research topics related to the site, I also would not want further investigation there, partly because it's so small and also, I mean, the very limited amount of excavation that occurred in 2010 produced such an incredible amount of information. We really, know a lot about it. Of course, there's always more things to learn, but I think protecting it is the paramount thing in this case. And that's part of the National Register listing. I hope as well will support the efforts of the DNR and the Bois Forte TIPO to protect it.
Great. I see that Bethany has her hand up.
Yes, kind of in a follow-up to Board Member Schulke, without getting too deep into whatever the heck is happening up in that area with protections. Is this area potentially threatened by upcoming potential mining or other ecological disturbances?
Not in any way that I'm aware of. In the future, who knows? Never say never. But I mean, right now the it's in the state park. There's not even a lot of the park's history relates to mining, but not in a current way. So.
And a follow-up mostly from my own education, because this is where I learned the most. The nomination indicated it was identified by shovel testing. Was it just was there a concerted effort in that entire area for shovel testing and that was where this turned up, or was it just happenstance?
Oh, yeah, great question. Yeah, so in these studies before the park opened, I mean, it was kind of an unprecedented thing. It was like, you know, the park planners at the time who were trying to make it happen talked about it as this Itasca-like opportunity for expanding state parks. So there hadn't been a new state park for a long time, but also, you know, anyway, the land was acquired, but then before any development of the park occurred, there were studies and including archaeology, other things too. I'm certain, but the state parks crew looked over as basically they looked at the whole park before it was developed, and then the development, when that did occur, was able to be planned around the significant places. So this place, within months of it being discovered, was identified in the parks management plan as a place to be preserved, which is great. And a real testament to Dave Radford and his colleagues and the Bois Forte TIPO that they made that happen.
All right, and Board Member White, would you like to comment?
David, in all board members, I have enjoyed learning and reviewing nominations for the time that I've been involved, which is a while. I truly got to tell you, I truly enjoyed learning and reading this nomination. I feel like I've added a whole piece to my knowledge, maybe not completely, but I really loved and valued it, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Board Member White. That makes me feel so good. And I was laughing at myself a number of times through the preparation of this thing, thinking like, it's probably not a great idea to write a nomination about something that you know, were involved with for your dissertation. And I was like, and that section was getting too long. And it was like, okay, calm down here a bit, buddy. But anyway, it was really fun to work on it. And thank you.
Board Member Lavasser.
Yeah, I'm just, as a fellow prehistoric archaeologist, I just wanted to maybe make aware the other more board members, the dozen or so years that I've been on this review board. This is only the second prehistoric nomination that I've seen, and so I really want to congratulate you on the nomination that you've written up. I think it was just absolutely wonderful, and keep it coming. Keep it coming.
Thank you, Board Member Lavasser. That means so much as well. And to the board, I mean, you might have noticed, but the Board Member Lavasser is cited in the nomination. One of the other sites with a very similar find to this in terms of the bear paws is South Pike Bay, which is listed in the National Register. But Board Member Lavasser and colleagues at Chippewa National Forest did a large investigation there, and the burned bear paw from that site is, as far as we know, the oldest in the state, about at least 8,000 years old. So really, really neat. Appreciate it.
Board Member Stark.
Thanks, David. I could love seeing your passion come through on the writing of that. Was the most exciting part of it, because we knew you were really behind it and it was really good. The bear ceremonialism, it's a little tough to say.
It
I was
is.
fascinated by that, and I really do want to do some more research. I saw you have another one of your things you've authored on that, I believe, mentioned there, and I'd love to look it up. I do have a question about dating, and it seems like there's 2-3 different kinds of dating. You know, the AD BC is what we're used to, but
oh yeah.
Before present, and that's 1950, and then because it's before radio, I had to look that up.
Yeah.
And then
So, oh, go ahead.
The ADE or BCE, and I don't know if, as a neophyte kind of for archaeology and looking at the beginning of this thing, if something like that was clarified and then it just went in would help.
Yeah. I should add something at the beginning to clarify those terms. So BP it means before present, years before present, and it's usually used specifically with radiocarbon dating, where the year zero or the present for radiocarbon dating is 1950. And so it's counting backward from there. And then there's a process to calibrate the dates to more accurately reflect calendar ages. The CE and BCE are common era and before common era that, correspond to AD and BC, but, are meant to apply in other areas of the world and other contexts that aren't specific to I guess the religious sense of those frameworks.
Time frame reference for 0 AD or whatever.
Yeah.
So are there any further comments?
Board Member Worcester has his hand raised.
Good, thank you.
Dave, I'm going to echo what some of the other folks have noted, and as somebody who relatively recently fell into the field of archaeology with all the work we've had done in our property here, some of which you've seen. It was interesting to read and see Jim Cummings digging in areas other than my backyard here. But I just, and to echo maybe what Board Member Schulke noted is, the potential for further investigation in the property, in terms of like larger excavation units or anything like that. But I guess if the Bois de Fort Trippo feels that it's good as is, I'll take I'm fine with that too. I think that's more than acceptable, and if that changes, it changes. But for right now, I think you've pretty well laid out the significance of the site, so I don't think there's any issue there with me at all.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, in this case, the site is so small. I mean, it's like a typical, kind of field school research dig would be too much. It would, the site partly has exceptional significance because, or integrity rather, because so little was excavated. And so even though it's small, it's almost entirely intact and in a good spot for preservation.
Chair Solomon, I see that Board Member Lavasser still has her hand up, so I just want to confirm that that's a technical glitch as opposed to additional information.
Yeah, that's just a technical thing, I guess. I said what I had to say.
Okay, great. I should, I'll raise my hand for a moment. So fascinating nomination. And I was so struck by the distance that some of the materials traveled to get to this site. So you mentioned that the Park Service is interested in smaller sites. Is there work being done to consider and map these sites to further understand trade networks?
I think, yes, I think some people have done that, and there's a lot more to do with it. I mean, some of this with Obsidian specifically and the sourcing studies, some of that goes back to the 1960s, where the archaeologists who were working on the Hopewell sites in Ohio were finding Obsidian there, and it's like, well, this isn't from Ohio, where's it coming from? And anyway, so that's when I think that's had a lot to do with the sourcing of Obsidian in general, which is a laboratory process that I could not do in a million years, but I appreciate that they did. And so yeah, some of this stuff has gone a lot farther than Minnesota. And it was really a national level trade network, and so this site, as we understand it now, is a little bit more recent than the Hopewell sites. This is light woodland, but it seems like there's a lot of there's other sites at Lake Vermilion where Obsidian has been found, not in these quantities so far, but it is there. It seems like maybe Lake Vermilion is a kind of a hot spot in the ancient obsidian trade in Minnesota. I don't know. Would be an interesting thing to look at further. I would like to learn more about Obsidian Cliff itself and how obsidian from that spot specifically is represented at other sites. A lot of the research that's gone on elsewhere about obsidian is like, I mean, it's just the focus on where did this come from? Oh, it came from Obsidian Cliff. It came from, Bear Butte or other places or Bear Gulch. And this site it strikes me as a place where we can say more about it just because, we can say we know more about the site. It's a very tight context where these things all seem to be associated. There's the obsidian, there's the hearth, there's the bare bone, and I can't prove it, of course, but thinking about what those connections might mean, maybe these flakes are from, the processes of making this bear feast. Maybe it's the, sharpening, maybe it's the hunting weapon, maybe it's sharpening the knife to butcher the bear, maybe it's for something else. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but it's really interesting that they all seem to be associated.
Great. Well, thank you. Are there any further comments or questions? I don't see any hands raised. Okay. The motion before the board is to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the nomination for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. We can now vote by roll call, beginning with Board Member Gladhill.
Aye.
James.
Aye.
Levasseur.
Aye.
Radford.
Aye.
Ramos Santos.
Aye.
Rulon Miller.
Aye.
Schilke.
Aye.
Stark.
Aye.
Terrell.
Aye.
White.
Aye.
Worcester.
Aye.
And Solomonson. I vote aye. The ayes carry. Motion passed. So move on to current category here. A property proposed to be removed from the National Register, which is the Stordahl Building, Jasper, Pipestone County. Ginny will tell us about it.
Thank you, Chair Solomonson. Back to the pedestrian work of the National Register. It's not near as interesting as bear ceremonialism. Here we have the Stordahl Building, Jasper, Pipestone County. According to Title 36 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 60.15A1, a property is removed from the National Register of Historic Places when, quote, the property has ceased to meet the criteria for listing in the National Register because the qualities which caused it to be originally listed have been lost or destroyed, end quote. Listed in March 3rd of 1980, the Stordahl Building is significant as, quote, one of the earliest and least altered quartzite buildings on Jasper's Main Street, end quote. The property is listed under criteria A and C in the areas of commerce and architecture. Here we see a map of the property boundaries indicated with the red box. When listed, the property was described as a, quote, two-story rectangular commercial building constructed of locally quarried quartzite stone, where the second story consisted of 3 evenly spaced arched windows with bracketed finials at the corners of the roof line, end quote. The building can be seen at the left in this photo from 1978. Sometime prior to 2007, the second story of the property was removed and the parcel was combined with the one immediately to the west. Primary source information determining the date of demolition is thus far unavailable. When it was added to the National Register, the Stordahl Building retained the 7 aspects of integrity. Now the property retains the integrity of location and setting. However, the loss of the second story diminishes the design, workmanship, materials, feeling, and association of the property. Because it has lost the historic qualities that made it eligible for listing, the property must be removed from the National Register. There is no correspondence related to this property.
Now, it's time for anyone who would like to make public comments about this. Is there anybody here who would like to speak?
I do not see any members of the public.
All right, so we'll turn now to the board's evaluation. And board members, may I have a motion regarding the removal of this property from the National Register of Historic Places?
Board Member Schulke, I make a motion to remove the, was it Stordahl building from the National Register of Historic Places.
Okay, so the motion will recommend to the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer the approval of the removal. Thank you, Board Member Schulke. Is there a second?
Board Member Stark, seconds.
Thank you very much. All right. Are there any comments or questions from the board about this?
I see that Board Member Gladhill has her hand raised.
Okay, Board Member Gladhill.
This is sort of immaterial to this particular sad situation of this site. It looks like the building on the other side might still be retained. Do we know if there are other quartzite buildings in Jasper still?
There are quartzite buildings in Jasper. We recently listed a building related to the Jasper newspaper that is a block away. I think that was listed in 2023. Jasper's quartzite buildings are not being well maintained in general, so they are becoming less prevalent along the main street here.
Thank you, Board Member Gladhill. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, the motion before the board is to recommend that the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer approve the removal of this property from the National Register of Historic Places. Now we'll vote by roll call, beginning with Board Member Gladhill.
Sadly, aye.
James?
Aye.
Lavasser?
Aye.
Radford?
Aye.
Ramos Santos?
Aye.
Schulke?
Aye.
Stark?
Aye.
Carroll?
Aye.
White?
Aye.
Worcester?
Aye.
And Solomonson, I vote aye. So
I'm sorry,
the
Chair Solomonson, did we, I think we missed Board Member Rulon Miller.
I
Oh,
vote
I'm
aye.
sorry. Oh, okay, good, thank you. All right, good. Okay, motion passed. This concludes the presentation of nominations, the nominations section of our meeting. Before we adjourn, do SHPO staff or board members have any additional business to discuss?
I wanted
I,
to, please go ahead, Board Member White.
I do have a question, and I'm wondering if Jenny, rather than taking up everybody's time, if Jenny, if you could give me a call tomorrow, or I'll call you, and I could have my question direct about then, rather than taking up everybody's time tonight.
Absolutely. I'm on a site visit after 10 a.m., but anytime before that, you're welcome to call me.
Thank you.
Of course. I did want to reiterate, Chair Solomonson, that one of the things David mentioned in his original announcements, because of the lack of nominations that are scheduled for the August meeting, we are looking at a November in-person meeting. At that time, we anticipate seeing the African American multiple property documentation form from the city of Minneapolis, along with 3 concurrent nominations. So That is on the federal timeline because they have a federal grant. So we don't anticipate that changing, and it should be a good one. So if you are available, we would love to have you join us here in St. Paul. Lillian will be communicating about the details at a later date, but if you have questions or concerns in the meantime, please let us know. The November meeting is scheduled at present for November 10th.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? All right, do we have a motion to adjourn? And there's no specific fancy language for that one. A motion to adjourn.
So moved from Board Member Gladhill.
Thank you. And this doesn't require a second. This concludes this Minnesota State Historic Preservation Review Board meeting. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.